being recorded. Only the main conference is recorded.
Good morning and welcome to the Office of State Procurement Purchasing 101 training. The training is going to be given by myself, Amy Vincent. I'm the manager on the one-time buy bid team, and Jeremy Meisky, which is also a manager in the office, and he's over the blanket service order team. So today we're going to discuss some of the basic building blocks of procurement, things that everyone should be aware of, who either work in procurement or helps with determining what products or services the agency needs. So let's take a look at the topics we'll be discussing today. We're going to give an introduction to procurement. We're going to discuss agencies' delegation of purchasing authority. We're going to talk about what governs procurement, the methods of procurement, also procurements with special requirements, deficiency complaints, and then we'll welcome any questions that you may have. So we're going to start off with some acronyms. These are some of the most commonly used acronyms that you will hear people who work in procurement use. So learning these shortcuts and what they mean will help you talk the talk of procurement, and we'll go into more detail further on regarding when some of these are used and what they mean. So just to touch on a few, you'll hear us talk about OSP, which of course is our Office of State Procurement. We'll talk about D of A, which is the Division of Administration. The Chief Procurement Officer, as we refer to as the CPO. DPAs, which is the Delegation of Purchasing Authority. The EO for Executive Order. GSA for General Service Administration, ITBs for the invitation to bid, then LMAS contracts, Louisiana Multiple Award Schedules, LAPS, the Louisiana Pricing Schedules. We'll talk about LAPAC, which is the Louisiana Procurement and Contract Network, and ECAT, which is our electronic catalog. So the Office of State Procurement, better known as OSP, is responsible for standardizing, procuring, and supervising the procurement of all goods, services, and major repairs required by state agencies. Through its centralized purchasing authority, OSP may bid out and award statewide contracts. OSP may also establish LMAS contracts, which are based on the GSA contracts, to make these available to all state agencies. In addition, OSP may partner with the national cooperative organizations such as NASPO, Sourcewell, Omnia, in order to participate in and access the pricing and benefits of those large-scale contracts and pass those savings on to our agencies. Through its cooperative purchasing authority, OSP is able to extend the benefits of these statewide contracts to include the opportunity to obtain these low prices on quality products and services to all agencies and political subdivisions. So the delegation of authority along with the guidelines are located on OSP's website under agency forms. The DPA questionnaire is the form that you will use to request an increase to an agency's authority based on the number of purchasing personnel, classifications, also years of experience and trainings that you've completed. So once the form has been filled out, it will be submitted to OSP by the agency via email by clicking the Submit by Email button at the bottom of the form. So what is the definition of the delegated purchasing authority? It's the written delegation and the dollar amount from the Chief Procurement Officer that agencies may procure themselves without submittal to OSP. Some examples of the commodities that have to come through OSP regardless of what your agency's DPA is vehicles and elevator maintenance.
All right, and now we're going to talk about what governs procurement. As you can see here, we've got Louisiana Revised Statute 39-1551 through 1744, the Louisiana Administrative Code, or LAC, Title 34, and the Small Purchase Executive Order, and these are the three main things. So, authorized by the legislature in the 2014 legislative session, the Office of State Procurement was created when the DOA's Office of Contractual Review and the Office of State Purchasing merged to become one unit. Additionally, most state agencies' procurement personnel have been centralized to OSP, with OSP managing a larger portion of statewide purchasing and contracting than had been the case prior to the centralization. One thing to note is that state agencies are governed by Title 39, whereas local government agencies like parish and city organizations fall under Title 38. OSP does not administer Title 38, so any procurements made by local government agencies do not come through our office. The Attorney General's office oversees Title 38 procurement. Title 39 is often referred to as the Louisiana Procurement Code. The Procurement Code creates the Central Purchasing Agency, which is OSP. It names the Director of State Procurement as the Chief Procurement Officer, or CPO, and it gives the CPO authority to procure all supplies, services needed by the state unless otherwise provided by law. Louisiana Revised Statute 39-1572 exempts certain agencies from going through OSP, and non-exempt agencies must follow OSP regulations for all procurements. Some of the examples of agencies that are partially exempt from OSP, per that second to last bullet, include DOTD for road building materials, services, and supplies only, Department of Education for textbooks, lab equipment, and teaching materials and supplies. And also important to note is that most colleges and university systems, such as LSU, Southern, UL, as well as special schools and institutions that are under the supervision of BESE, the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education, are exempt from central procurement, except for the following categories: professional, personal, consulting, social services, information technology, and vehicles. These agencies have the option to utilize OSP if they wish to for their exempt commodities, but they are not required to. And all other state agencies are considered non-exempt. So what is the Administrative Code and how does it apply to procurement? The code is a state-certified publication that provides a set of rules that have been formally adopted or amended by Louisiana state agencies. And the rules in the LAC are published in accordance with legislative authority and through legal rulemaking procedure. Title 34 of the LAC is entitled Government Contracts, Procurement, and Property Control, and it contains the rules related to public procurement. So basically, this is going to dive into a little bit more detail than you would see in statute. So it's a lot more like the actual hands-on how we do things. We also have the Small Purchase Executive Order, which governs purchases that are made between $10,000 and $30,000, and it lists other special procurements that are exempt from competitive sealed bidding requirements that are contained in the Procurement Code. Currently, we operate under the Small Purchase Executive Order, JBE 2020-21, or -21. This is the new Small Purchase Executive Order. New Small Purchase Executive Orders are typically issued if changes are needed or if a new governor is elected. So reference this one until you find out that there's another one. Usually, you'll get notified by the SPA that you're working with if there's been a recent update. So what does an agency do when they need to purchase something? First, they need to identify their need, and they're going to do this. So an agency identifies its need by determining which goods or services will satisfy those needs, gathering information that will help simplify the procurement process, including specifications, sources, proper commodity class, and estimated costs. Keep in mind that when an agency needs something from OSP, for us to bid it out, we're going to need to make sure that, to the best of our ability, that we've gotten all of this information, because these are things that a vendor is going to need to know in order to bid on the product or service. When we have an entire presentation that deals with how to write good specifications, which I believe is happening later today. So when you're in that first step, identifying the need, if you need a refresher on the types of things that we're looking for on a shopping cart, I would recommend reviewing any of our previous trainings on that, or making sure that you're in the session later today. So then secondly, the need to determine the method of procurement, which could be any of the following: statewide contract, small purchase executive order, fax bid, competitive sealed bidding with advertisement, sole source, proprietary, emergency, RFP. And to some extent, these are in kind of the order that you should be attempting to do them. If we've got a statewide contract, we'd prefer to go that route because it's already been procured, down to, you know, an RFP being kind of one of the more complicated things we have to do, and an emergency being limited on competition. So that's why those are last. So first up, like I said, we've got statewide contracts. OSP develops statewide contracts in various commodity areas in order to group the needs of different agencies. Statewide contracts standardize products and services, consolidates usage for lower prices, and reduces administrative costs. These contracts allow our agencies the convenience of purchasing items directly without having to competitively bid them, you know, on an individual case-by-case basis, which saves everybody a lot of time and effort. Most of them are not mandatory. However, many do have a minimum order requirement, and this is partly because, as I think you all probably know, shipping costs have gone through the roof. So it's important that we're, you know, meeting all of the requirements that are stated on the contract, because that's how the vendors are able to make money as well. Contract purchases are not limited to the agency's DPA, but some, we have a strikeout there, sorry. But some agencies may set their own internal purchasing limits within their agency. So that is one important thing that you will need to kind of work internally and make sure that you're following all of your own procedures, not just buying things kind of at random. To use a contract, agencies just have to select the desired items to be purchased, source the statewide contract in LeGov, and issue a purchase order. All of that should happen automatically. The approvals should go to your internal folks, and they should not come here. If they do, it'll show up on that approval tab in your purchase order. You can contact that SPA that's listed there and let them know that you're trying to purchase this off a contract, and get that approval moved through. There are a number of different types of statewide contracts. So first of all, we've got generic or standard contracts, which are bid out by our office just like a regular bid. We have the specifications. They're usually for products, and they will usually have a brand and model with an or equal to be bid, meaning that we'll accept alternate products that meet the specifications. We also have brand name contracts, which are exactly like they sound. They are bid out for specific product lines carried by a particular brand. Some examples of this type of contract are janitorial chemicals and agricultural equipment. We also have Lamont contracts, which are issued based on GSA contracts. GSA administers their own contracts, and then we will issue a Lamont contract off of that. We're piggybacking at that point. So if you see a GSA contract out in the wild, you can't just use that. We would need to issue a Lamont contract in order for that to be approved. We also have multi-state cooperative contracts, which are created by national agencies, which specialize in establishing large multi-state contracts in order to maximize buying power. We can choose to do a participating addendum to be part of that cooperative contract and then issue our own statewide contract based off of it. The cooperatives we usually utilize are NASPO, Sourcewell, and Omnia. So again, same as GSA, if you see one of those contracts, if a vendor contacts you and says, oh, you can just buy off of my Sourcewell contract, you need to get in touch with us first and make sure that we have a participating addendum, because there are checks that we need to do to make sure that they're meeting our laws and regulations. And usually that's not a huge problem, but it is a procedure that we have to go through. We also have emergency contracts, which are competitively bid out just like the generic and standard contracts, but these contracts emphasize product and service availability over a low price. These are only activated during an emergency declared by the governor, such as for a hurricane. And agencies can't use these year-round because typically they don't have the best pricing because we are telling them you have to get us to this, or I'm sorry, you have to get this to us within 24 hours. Whereas with a regular contract, we might give them a longer lead time and let them state that themselves. We try to award these emergency contracts to multiple vendors in every category just to make sure that we have the widest supply coverage possible. As you've probably, dealt with in the past, you might have to go to multiple emergency contracts to find somebody who's got, for example, generators, ice, things like that, oil. These can be kind of difficult to find when the entire Gulf Coast is at risk of being hit and everybody is staging everything. Statewide contracts also have a variety of pricing formats. Some of them are itemized, meaning that each line of the contract is going to have a set price stated for that contract line. And as an example, most of the emergency contracts are set up that way. So as you're looking at it, the line will have a dollar amount, and that's the amount for that line. Others are going to be awarded based on a % discount of the manufacturer's standard pricing list. These are frequently used on the agricultural brand name product or brand name contracts such as John Deere. And so basically that'll be like you can get the lawnmower you want for 15% off, what you would have to buy it in the store for. Others are awarded based on the entire catalog, which is typically in the form of a custom website such as Grainger or Office Supplies. Almost all state contracts are non-mandatory, and the notable exceptions are vehicles. Vehicles is very, I think you'll notice the trend as we're going through these. Vehicles have a lot more requirements, so it's important to dot all your I's and cross your T's with the vehicles, especially right now with supply crunches. So you can get in touch with our office to, if you have any questions specifically about that. We also have lapse contracts, which I think, as Amy mentioned, are the Louisiana pricing schedule. As noted here, lapse contracts apply to all brand name, Lamont, and cooperative contracts. So it's kind of an umbrella category. The easiest way to explain this is by giving an example. So say an agency wants to buy a tractor. We've got a statewide contract for agricultural equipment for John Deere, Bush Hog, Kubota, Woods, Case, Tiger, New Holland, Rhino, and Alamo. So there's a wide selection. An agency should contact at least 3 of those vendors who carry the tractors in the size that they're looking for and request a quote based on the contract. You do not have to go with the lowest price, but if you do not, then you need to be documenting your file with a legitimate reason as to why you went around the lowest for cost auditing purposes. If the legislative auditor comes and asks you, you need to be able to show, okay, we didn't go with Alamo because we already have 7 Kubotas and we don't want to increase our maintenance costs, something to that effect.
We have a few questions. What if all of the lines on a contract are not showing? For example, I was looking at the SRM catalog and did not see all of the lines to search for the items.
If you don't see all of the line items for the contract, you need to reach out to the buyer on that contract.
Okay, the next question is how do I find our agency's DPA?
Your agency's DPA, you can email our office. Zelinsky Matthews is our assistant director, and he keeps a list of the agency's DPAs, but I'm not sure if it's your LeGov administrator at the agency. Each agency has a LeGov administrator that sets up people in LeGov and gives permissions. So you could check there first, but again, you can email our office to get your agency's DPA if you do not know it.
There's also a letter that would have been sent, but it only gets sent when the DPA changes. So if you don't have a copy of that,
Right.
then yeah, you will need to get in touch with us. But if you're looking through your old files, you might be able to find that.
Most agencies' DPAs are all set at $10,000 for procurement. There are a few agencies that have a higher DPA, but most agencies' DPA is $10,000.
And please note, when Amy says 10,000 for procurement, we mean like for purchasing, and you will have a different DPA for your professional, social, consulting contracts.
Right.
So that's gonna be a whole separate number.
Okay, can all agencies use all emergency contracts?
No. So some emergency contracts are specific to a particular agency. So I think, for example, DOTD has a couple of emergency contracts for certain types of buildings, like temporary buildings to get set up. So another agency wouldn't be able to necessarily just automatically go and use that. If you are looking at a contract and are not sure, the first place to look in ECAT would be, or actually on the contract face itself too, there's a line for co-op. If it says yes on co-op, then you should be able to use it. If it says no, then that means that it's specific to a specific type of agency. Usually those contracts will include language in them indicating which agency they're for, who can use them. You could ask that agency if you can utilize it, but in instances where it's a limited supply and a particular agency needs a specific thing, then generally you would have to ask their permission to use it. They would need to basically verify that they're not going to need that asset. So
this one goes back to close to the beginning when you guys were talking about NASPO. Cooperative contracts. If someone wants to know, what does NASPO mean, how does it work, and what types of vendors does it include?
So NASPO is the, like a lot of agencies have like a nationwide state version, it's like a grouping of all the state agencies that are like that, all 50 of them. That's what our NASPO is, and NASPO runs a program called Value Point, which is their cooperative contracts, and so they basically just get a group of state agencies together. There's going to be a lead agency, so sometimes it's going to be us, sometimes it's Texas, I think Hawaii, Oklahoma, whatever, and they will basically run the procurement, and then that gives anybody who wants to access to do a participating addendum to work off of that as well. The types of contracts that are on there, I would say it's pretty wide. I know like garage equipment, like lifts are on there, like Snap-on and Mohawk. If you go onto our ECAT and type in either NASPO or VP for Value Point on the description line, there's a bunch of them that'll come up, and you'll be able to see a variety of things on there. And basically what these do is it just gives us kind of an efficiency that, we can sign on to something that we maybe had a part in bidding, but we didn't do the entire thing. Yeah, here we go. So you can see here on the top left, the second one, contract description. If you type in NASPO or VP there, it should bring up a good number of them.
There are a few more questions, but I think you guys are going to touch on the thresholds and the requirements and documents needed for that.
Okay.
In the next few slides. So if you guys have any questions after they go through the next, I'd say 5 or 6 slides, let us know and type them in the chat.
Okay. So as far as statewide contracts, this is how you would search. This is ECAT, or Louisiana's Electronic Catalog, and this is where all of our active contracts can be viewed online, either by agencies, vendors, or anyone who goes to the website. This is public-facing. There is no login. It's open to everybody. I will say, when we say active contract, that means active contract. If a day has passed since that contract's end date, it will not show up here. So if you utilize a contract regularly, I would recommend that you download it, download all of its attachments that are available, and save it. Because what will sometimes happen is the contract will go dark on ECAT. You won't be able to find it, even though you've already put it in order, and you're just looking for it for audit purposes. So it's good to just have that on hand if you purchase from it regularly. So as you're looking at this, you can search for the contract in many different ways. All of these fields are search fields. So if you know the contract number, you can type it in the top left box, contract number. If you know the vendor name, you can search for it there. Some vendors have multiple contracts, so that can be important to differentiate it. If you're not able to find a particular product, you might vendor's the wrong contract. You can also search by a description, such as vehicle or, paper. You can search in there. And then as you go toward the right, you've got more specific search fields for specific lines. You can kind of look, like, for example, if you type into product category line item description, you might be able to search for, like, an actual particular product that might be on multiple contracts. These are the three main types of searches, though. Oh, yeah, here we go. Sorry. So, yeah, product line description, that would be where you would probably want to, if you were digging in for a specific thing and didn't know what contract it was. Also, as you can see on the right, there's an emergency toggle, so you can type, or you can change that to yes or no to search for emergency contracts. If you want to find all emergency contracts, just leave everything blank, switch that to yes, and say find it, and that'll bring up all of our emergency contracts.
All right, so now what if an agency has looked all through ECAT, maybe even called someone at OSP, and it's been determined that whatever they need to buy is not available on a state contract, or for some reason, whatever is not on contract will meet their needs. So when the agency determines that the goods or services required are not available through any statewide contract, or they do not choose to utilize the existing contract, because remember, not all statewide contracts are mandatory, the agency may handle the purchase if it is within your DPA, or two, the agency may submit a shopping cart to OSP for bidding. So small purchases greater than $30,000, and then an ITB or an RFP would be the next step. So if the agency sends the shopping cart to OSP, then it will need to be determined how it will be handled. And again, always look at your small purchase executive order and see if it falls under one of the exemptions. If it needs to go out on an ITB, those need to be advertised in the newspaper, and vendors must submit responses either physically or online. RFPs, requests for proposals, these are used for very large, complex purchases where specifications may be difficult to write and where factors other than cost are going to need to be taken into consideration. So as we mentioned earlier, the small purchase executive order governs special types of procurements between $10,000 and $30,000. So we'll discuss the sections of the executive order in greater detail. So Section 4A of the executive order states that no competitive process is required for purchases that do not exceed $10,000 per single purchase transaction. So most agencies purchase goods and services under $10,000 either by using their P cards or by issuing low-dollar POs within their agency's DPA. So if the purchase is between 10 and 20 and it does not fall under one of the special exempt commodities in either Section 5A or 5B of the EO, it is then governed by Section 4B. So most of the times, agencies submit these purchases to OSP on a shopping cart for our office to do a fax bid. So agencies submitting purchases between 10 and 20 to OSP to be put out as a fax bid and posted to LPAC. This ensures that all procurement regulation requirements are met. However, the small purchase EO gives the minimum requirements necessary for these types of purchases. So if you're looking at the slide, Section 4B talks about agency quotes. Purchases over 10,000 K but less than 20 require at least 3 quotes from qualified vendors whenever possible. At least one of those vendors needs to be an SEBD vendor. Purchases over 20,000 but less than 30,000 require at least 5 quotes from qualified vendors whenever possible, at least 2 of those vendors need to be SEBD vendors. So if you're wondering exactly what a qualified vendor means, that means that in order to satisfy these requirements of the EO when obtaining quotes for a product or service, you'll have to contact vendors who could legitimately supply that item or service. So in other words, if an agency is obtaining quotes for someone to come out and pressure wash their office building, then you wouldn't call ABC Computer Store for a quote and counting that as a no bid, because that no bid would not meet the requirements, because obviously they could not provide or be expected to bid on that type of service. One other thing we'd like to point out is that if an agency needs help finding a list of SEBD vendors, they can go to the LED website, the Louisiana Department of Economic Development, and find a list of vendors there. So before obtaining quotes, agencies must contact OSP either by phone or email for permission to obtain quotes prior to bidding any item over the agency's DPA. So if approved, OSP is going to issue an authorization number. The agency will then obtain quotes, make sure that your quotes are apples to apples, make sure that the vendors are bidding the same thing, and submit this documentation with your shopping cart. And you should reference that authorization number on all your procurement documents. OSP will then, once we receive your shopping cart with the quotes, OSP will then issue a PO, or the agency can actually put in a purchase order and it'll build an approval over to OSP, and then we'll review all of the documentation attached, check the authorization number, and then approve the PO. So getting quotes is only for very limited circumstances. And by limited circumstances, we mean that having this mechanism in the small purchase EO, it does not automatically give every agency a DPA of $30,000 and the ability to purchase up to that amount by obtaining quotes. The types of purchases that agencies are typically given authorization to obtain quotes on are things that would be hard to bid out and evaluate, either due to your agencies under a time constraint for an immediate need, or that difficulty in writing specifications due to some unknown factors. So for example, a large piece of equipment that needs repairs, but vendors have to actually come out to the agency to do an individual assessment to give a quote. The agency's security guard resigned unexpectedly, and the agency needs a short-term replacement for a month, while OSP has to rebid the annual contract. So those are 2 examples of when we would need to just hurry up, get quotes, get it approved, get you an authorization number so that we could bid it out at a later date. So again, we want to just stress that agencies must contact OSP for authorization to utilize quotes before obtaining the quotes when the procurement is expected to exceed your DPA.
We did have one question. I just want to make sure that I heard correctly. Title 38 is overseen by the Attorney General's office.
Yes.
Correct.
Sorry, I lost it. I work for the parish government. We use Title 38. Does that mean that we should reach out to the Attorney General's office for procurement needs, or do we still need to follow OSP guidelines as well?
You reach out to the Attorney General's office for direction in procuring all items and services.
Here's another question. So clerical in our office are responsible for the procurement items like security guard and employee drug testing. Would we also be responsible for the larger contracts? What is the limit that the local office can do and or be responsible for?
What office is this? It's a local office?
Just says local office. Mary, do you want to be specific and tell us who you're with? Lafayette Parish unit for DCFS.
So you would need to get with the main DCFS office to verify what your delegated purchasing authority is.
That's it so far.
And I would say too, as far as like local governments, that, you know, like we said, you do fall under Title 38. When you're procuring something on your own, you do need to, go through the Attorney General's office to verify that you're doing everything in accordance with Title 38. However, there are still state contracts that you can utilize. There is a questionnaire on our website that you can find in the agency forms, I believe, or it's a quasi-agency, basically, is what we consider. You're a political subdivision still, and so what you do is you fill this out, and basically it just says, yeah, we use tax revenue to fund our operations, and it gives some more details about your organization. Most of you are probably already approved, but you submit that to our office, it gets reviewed, and then you get a letter basically saying you're approved as a quasi-agency to utilize our statewide contracts. So that's still an option for you, but please do make sure that you are approved for that and have access to those statewide contracts.
All right, so the next slide still is covering the small purchase executive order. We're going to talk about Section 5A. And 5A lists specific items that are considered small purchases and for which no competitive process is required. And then please note that a few of these items do have dollar limit caps on them. So if your purchase exceeds the cap, you must either obtain quotes or submit it as a sole source. So commonly used 5A exemptions are authorized dealer repairs and parts, purchasing transactions between governmental agencies, copyright materials, educational training materials, and this also includes memberships and accreditations. There's also advertising to reach targeted audiences. So these are just some of the most common. There's a list of 32 total exemptions under 5A of the executive order, and it's important to keep in mind that your agency's DPA still applies even when you are purchasing an exempt product or service under the executive order. So if a PO is entered for a $13,000 authorized dealer repair for a large piece of equipment, just for example, the PO is still going to build approvals to OSP if the agency's DPA is only $10,000. So when this happens, there should always be notes from the agency entered on the PO, and any required documentation should be attached in LGov referencing the small purchase EO and the particular section of the EO that you are trying to utilize. So for instance, on that authorized dealer repair PO, there should be an attached signed authorized dealer certification form from the vendor and also an invoice or a firm quote showing the price. We sometimes will receive POs in the office for approval and there is nothing attached, no notes and only description on the line saying something like the learning experience, and there's no way for us to know if this PO is for a training class or for books. It could be for software or something else, and we can't even tell if it falls under the small purchase executive order. Not until we reach out to the agency, the person that actually entered the shopping cart, to get more information and documentation. So having all of this entered on the front end will greatly speed up the approval process once the PO comes to our office for review. And if it's submitted as a shopping cart, we will need all of that required documentation in order to issue a purchase order. So Section 5B of the executive order is a little bit different. It lists specific items for which the agency does have to solicit competition, unlike the items in 5A, but that only require obtaining telephone or fax quotes from at least 3 qualified vendors, regardless of the dollar amount, and unless that item has a dollar cap on it. And again, those dollar caps are listed on the EO. And again, one of these vendors should be an SEBD vendor. So what sets this apart from Section 4B of the executive order is that the majority of these items do not have any dollar limit for obtaining quotes, although a few do have caps. So also, if an agency is obtaining quotes for one of these specific commodities, they do not have to contact OSP for prior authorization. So if you're utilizing one of these listed on 5B, you do not have to call OSP to get authorization to utilize quotes. So any PO entered in LGOV that exceeds the agency's DPA will still build approvals to our office, but as long as on the shopping cart references the proper EO section and number and provides the appropriate documentation showing that you've met the executive order requirements, then our office will approve it. So commonly used 5B exemptions are foreign products such as eggs, gasoline and fuel purchases that are not on statewide contract, livestock feed commodities not exceeding $30,000, and then convention and meeting facilities. So split purchasing. Split purchasing shall not be divided to avoid the competitive process or the solicitation of competitive sealed bids. So split purchasing can sometimes be difficult to define, but sometimes just giving an example is the easiest way to explain it. So say an agency is building a fence at one of their locations, and they know that they will need X amount of materials to complete that job. And that totals approximately $15,000. So if they go to their local hardware store and purchase $9,000 of supplies this week, and then they go back in a week and purchase the remaining $6,000 worth of supplies, that is considered split purchasing. Because the agency already knew when they made that first purchase that they were going to need more and that it would put it over their $10,000 DPA. So the agency deliberately split it in order to keep it under $10,000 so that they didn't have to send it to our office to be bid out. So let me give one more example of what might look like split purchasing but really isn't split purchasing. Say that same agency built that entire fence they needed for $9,000. But a few days after they finished it, there's a really bad storm and several trees and, say, branches fall on a portion of the fence. So they have to go out and purchase another $2,000 of materials to fix what was destroyed. This is not split purchasing because the agency had no way of knowing part of the fence was going to be destroyed and need replacing right away when they spent that initial $9,000. The agency will need to document their file to explain the situation along with any notes or anything that will help an auditor to understand why the purchases were made so close together but at separate times.
Okay. No question. So fax bids. If a procurement is sent to OSP to be bid and the estimated cost of it is less than $25,000 total, OSP will typically handle that as a fax bid. Fax bids are posted to LPAC, but they are not advertised in the newspaper, so they can generally be processed more quickly. However, if the estimated dollar amount is close to that $25,000 limit, or for advertisement threshold, then OSP will generally process the procurement as a sealed bid because the lowest responsible bid may end up exceeding $25,000, and if that file was not advertised, then we can't award it. The other caveat here is if you are working with either me or Amy and doing a one-time purchase with repurchasing available, or a a blanket order with, estimated quantities, then if you bid it out and it comes in at $24,999, you don't have very many options for executing change orders if you do need to increase those quantities. We can't increase past that $25,000 threshold unless it was advertised. So we have run into that as a problem this year with some folks. So it's just something to keep in mind as you're looking to do this. If you're coming in and telling us it's going to be $22,000, I know it is because the price is this, that's fine. If you know that's all you're going to need, then we can still proceed as a fax bid. But if you think, maybe later this year I might need to increase that quantity, you need to tell us that up front so that we can go ahead and get it advertised and give you that flexibility. If a procurement exceeds $25,000 and does not qualify for one of those special exemptions under the executive order, or it is not a sole source, which we will talk about next, and it is also not available on an existing state contract, then it will probably have to be bid out as a competitive sealed bid. Please note that although small purchase executive order limit has been raised from to $30,000, so that's the $10,000 to $30,000 we were referencing earlier, as of now, that advertising threshold is still $25,000. So they do not match. They are in different parts of statute. They just haven't been updated to match, meaning that any competitive bid expected to exceed $25,000 must be advertised in the newspaper, in addition to being posted to LAPAC. And this is something that we're looking at getting to where it'll match, but that is a time-consuming process and has not been accomplished yet. Competitive sealed bids, or ITBs, that we mentioned earlier, invitation to bid, procedures are that, follow these procedures. So we got procedures set in Louisiana Revised Statute 39-1594B, and also LAC Title 34, Part 5. This requires at least 10 days of advertising in a newspaper and posting to LAPAC. We also might have RFPs, which follow procedures found in Louisiana Revised Statute 39-1595, and these require a 30-day advertisement period in newspaper or LAPAC.
We did have a question come in that goes back to what y'all were talking about a few slides ago.
Okay.
So it's about split purchasing. If a person makes a purchase from company A with 1,000 pencils, and then he or she makes another purchase from the same company of 1,000 paper clips a day later from the same company, would it be considered split purchasing?
No, and it's not over your agency's delegated purchasing authority. You're not splitting the purchase to go around having to submit it to our office to be bid out. You're not trying to circumvent the law. You're just purchasing, at this point, $2,000 worth of office supplies. All right, so next we're going to talk about sole source purchases. And sole source purchase is a purchase that is available from only one source, and it's usually the manufacturer, and it's not sold through distributors. The state does not recognize distributor territories, so it wouldn't be sole source if it was just, say, the vendor stated that they're the only ones that sold in the southern region. That would not be sole source, because that's a territory. So very often we'll get shopping carts sent in with a note that they are sole source because vendor ABC, is only they're the only ones authorized to sell this product in Louisiana, or maybe the only one in Louisiana, and like I said, the southern states However, there may be another distributor, say in Florida or one in California as an example, and again, this does not qualify as sole source. We will make exceptions only if any other distributors are outside of the United States. But again, that's reviewed by our office and it's a case-by-case basis. Sole source can also be justified when compatibility is the paramount consideration. So when a sole supplier's item is needed for trial use or testing, and when items are purchased for resale, and also for like utility services or livestock, breeding stock. But again, those specific circumstances are reviewed usually by assistant director at our office and sometimes the deputy director for approval. You can look at the revised statutes that define sole source purchases under Louisiana Revised Statute 391597. And it states that a contract may be awarded for a required supply, service, or major repair without competition when the following established sole source guidelines, the CPO or his designee above the level of procurement officer determines in writing that there is only one source for the required supply, service, or major repair item. So again, if you look at the revised statute, it states what documentation is needed, and then once it comes to our office, the CPO, the deputy director, will have to review and approve that. So what does an agency need to do in order for a sole source to be approved? First, you will need to submit a letter from an agency, from an office of the agency itself. So the agency in the letter should submit in writing what other brands and models were looked at and why no other product is suitable or acceptable for their needs. You should also state the unique characteristics of the chosen product and a statement that is sold by only one known supplier. The agency obtains and submits a letterhead statement from the sole source vendor declaring that the product is sold only directly by their company and that they do not have any distributors. And this letter needs to come from someone other than just a sales representative. And finally, the vendor must provide the agency with, 1, a firm price quote and either a published price list or a typed and notarized list of the standard pricing if a published price list is not available. At no time should the quote to the agency exceed the standard published pricing. So a lot of people get the price quote and the price list confused. So think of the published price list as what you could find on the vendor's website or in a catalog. Basically, it's what they would sell their product or service to, say, John Doe and the general public. If the vendor doesn't have a published price list, maybe because the product is customized or made to order, they can type up a listing of standard pricing and have that list notarized, and that'll take place of the published price list. The quote is the exact price that the vendor has agreed to sell the product for to our agency or to your state agency. And this will be the amount that the PO will actually be issued for, and the quote does not have to be notarized. Also, this amount should never exceed what the general public would pay. And it can be equal too, but in most instances, it should be less. Any questions on this? Okay. All right, so moving on, we're going to talk about used equipment. So one special type of sole source purchase that has its own set of procedures is used equipment. You can find the rules for used equipment under Louisiana Revised Statute 391645. And it states that the purchase of used equipment falls under the conditions for the use of sole source procurement, again, as defined in the rules and regs, Title 34, Chapter 9, Section 905, and it actually defines used equipment and then what all is needed for used equipment. So as a general rule, as the note on the bottom of the slide, agencies should procure new equipment, but there are situations where it's necessary to purchase used equipment. So let's talk about what the special situations where an agency might want to consider buying used equipment. So the most common reasons, the first bullet is the inability to secure new equipment, so lack of availability. This is particularly of relevance in the current world market situation where vehicles and other heavy equipment are experiencing extremely long lead times, and manufacturers have production timelines that are right now extending out a year or more. So the next bullet states the lack of adequate funds for new equipment. So sometimes an agency simply doesn't have the funds available in their current budget to be able to afford new equipment, so they have no choice but to find a used equipment. So used equipment that will satisfy the agency's need is available at a substantial savings. So other times, they may have enough money to buy new equipment, but there's no reason to, because they found a piece of used equipment that's in really good shape and will do what they needed to do at a much cheaper cost. So these are the most common reasons. So how does an agency go about submitting a used equipment purchase to OSP for approval? So along with your shopping cart, you will need to submit all 4 of the bullets that are listed on the slide. So the agency will submit a letter stating the following information for used equipment. It'll state the price of used equipment versus new equipment, and then attach quotes whenever possible. It'll state the agency's plan for maintenance and repair of the equipment, including the estimated cost. It will state the savings that will accrue to the state by purchasing the used equipment. And lastly, a statement of fact that following bid procedures set out in the Louisiana Procurement Code would result in the loss of opportunity to purchase that piece of equipment. So the last bullet basically means that oftentimes used equipment is only available for a limited time. A dealer is not going to hold a used tractor on its lot for, say, 4 to 6 weeks while the state goes through the whole bidding process, for example, especially if he isn't guaranteed to win that bid. He's going to sell that tractor to the first person that comes along and wants to buy it. So that's why we use this statement in the agency letter.
Moving now from sole source to proprietary, a lot of people get these two confused. So we're going to talk about what proprietary means. A proprietary specification is a specification that cites a particular brand name, model number, or some other designation that identifies a specific product to be offered exclusive of all others in accordance with Louisiana Revised Statute 39-1655. So basically what this means is that only one product is going to meet the state's needs due to compatibility, standardization, or maintainability. Those are the key words we're looking for. When the products are available from more than one source and therefore can be competitively bid, it is not sole source. So this is kind of the situation where effectively you need a particular thing. The manufacturer may have distributors, so there are multiple people who might be able to offer you a deal. If they've got something on their lot that hasn't moved in a while and they need to get rid of it, they might give it to you at a better discount than the guy down the road will. The biggest difference between sole source and proprietary is that proprietary is only available from that one vendor, like we said before, usually the manufacturer. Therefore, sole source is not bid out. But since the proprietary items could be available from multiple distributors, we do competitively bid it so that they have to bid against each other and we get the best available price. So the example that we've got for this one is that an agency must have a Carhartt Model 123 jacket for its employees because it's part of their uniform and they all have to match. This qualifies as proprietary because we're looking at standardization, but because there are multiple distributors who can sell Carhartt brand, we're going to bid it out. So what is required from an agency when they want to make a proprietary purchase? An agency submits a justification on the agency letterhead to the Office of State Procurement stating why only one brand name or a particular item is suitable for their needs and the unique characteristics of that product. Note that simply having a preference for one brand or another is not sufficient. So, I mean, I get it. Like, if you know something works, you know something works, and you're going to want that thing. But unfortunately, state law doesn't allow us the flexibility there. We're going to have that justification. The use of proprietary specification must be justified and approved in writing by the Chief Procurement Officer or designee higher than our analyst. So you might let your SPA that you're working with know that you want to do this, and they're going to have to route it up to at least their supervisor. More than likely, depending on the cost, it's going to go to either me or Amy or even one of our assistant directors. The agency will also, so it does take a little bit more time, is my point in saying that. The agency will submit a shopping cart in LeGov, selecting the necessary boxes to notify OSP that they are requesting a proprietary purchase and attaching the justifications there. If the justification for proprietary specification is sufficient and approved by OSP management, then we will bid the procurement out with the language in there stating that the bid has to be, or has been approved as proprietary and that no other brands or models will be accepted. And this allows us to go around somebody else trying to offer an alternative. We have had issues in the past where we've done something as proprietary and then the vendor tries to substitute a similar model, and the agency would actually wind up being fine with that, but based on that gives us that's a problem. We've got a conflict there, and oftentimes we'd have to rebid that. So be pretty sure of what you're saying in your justification letter when we get to that point. Do we have any questions on that? Okay. We also can do emergency purchases, and emergency purchases are exactly what they sound like. They are procurements made due to an emergency situation, and standard procurement regulations are suspended, meaning that you do not have to bid them out. However, the agency should always attempt to obtain at least 3 quotes whenever possible. The emergency purchases must be made in accordance with Revised Statute 39-1598. It's always a good idea to know what you can do in case of an emergency, so I would say go and read that and make sure you're familiar with it. When it comes to procurement, an emergency can be described as a situation that creates an immediate or serious need for supplies, services, or major repairs that cannot be met through normal procurement methods. There are 2 types of emergencies. We have a usual emergency and a catastrophic emergency, and I'm going to go into details on those in just a second. And in either of these types, the situation, when we're talking about an emergency, is something that creates an imminent threat to public health, safety, welfare, public property, or impacts or threatens the functioning of Louisiana government. So those are the key words that we're kind of looking for when you're doing your justifications. Who's going to be hurt by it? What's going to be the impact if this doesn't get fixed? That sort of thing. So looking at first a usual emergency. A usual emergency occurs during daily operation of an agency and typically only affects that one agency. For example, a broken water or sewer line. Obviously, this is a big problem, but it's not impacting even a region of the state or even, an entire block. You had a pipe burst, and it is now, getting all your files wet. That's a problem. In the event of a usual emergency, the agency should contact OSP to obtain an emergency authorization number prior to making an emergency purchase. However, if an emergency procurement need arises after hours or on the weekends, the agency should proceed with any purchase necessary to mitigate the emergency situation and then contact OSP the next business day, like 8 o'clock the next business day. We need to hear from you. We don't want to set a situation up where you feel like you have to sit on something and wait for us to respond if it is truly an emergency. That's why it's important to look at these rules now, so that you know what's allowable, so that should something happen, you're not left waiting for someone else to tell you to go. We don't want to make the situation worse by waiting. And again, you should always try to obtain 3 quotes whenever possible in order to ensure that we're paying a reasonable price, even if you don't end up using the lowest quote because there's a vendor that can provide a product or service faster and time is of the essence. It's still important to make sure that you're not getting price gouged, especially if you call with a panic in your voice. Some people might take advantage of that. So we want to make sure that we're doing our due diligence as much as possible. Also, it's important for an agency to keep in mind that lack of planning does not equal an emergency. We can't bypass procurement regulations just because an agency wants to purchase something, and there's a time crunch because there was, a miscommunication at the beginning, or you got a quote 6 months ago and now all of a sudden it's an emergency. This gets kind of dicey for us, and we will ask those questions. So we don't want to be approving things that's going to call attention to us and get everyone else's emergency procurements at risk. So we're going to have to make sure we're doing all of this correctly. And I think we're all intimately familiar with catastrophic emergencies over the last several years. A catastrophic emergency is a situation that is declared by the governor and usually affects a large number of people over a wide area, such as a hurricane. Obviously, we've got the pandemic, we've got the ice storms. This has been a recurring theme for us really over the last decade. In the event of a catastrophic emergency, OSP has over 100 existing emergency contingency contracts that are available for use when the governor declares a state of emergency. So that's important to know, to have checked. I mean, really, go into ECAT and search for just emergency contracts and look through them and see what's available. Because if you already know in advance that a storm is coming, you can already be looking at those and know, oh, well, I'm going to need these things. Let me go ahead and kind of prepare. These contracts can be easily found, like I said, by searching for emergency or using that toggle. As mentioned before, these can only be used during governor-declared emergency situations, specifically because they are awarded based on availability of supply and delivery times and not on price. So you will be paying more. Sometimes we'll have a contract for normal ice and emergency ice. The emergency ice is always going to be more expensive. So we don't want to use it unless we have to. When utilizing an OSP contract in a declared emergency, it is highly recommended that a copy of that contract be placed with the file to assist with any potential FEMA reimbursements. This becomes a situation because a lot of times there's a lead time of almost a year before FEMA is asking you questions. So it's really good to have all that already printed off for yourself. We can get copies of it, but it does become kind of time-consuming if it's something that's expired and has been reawarded to someone else and no one remembers the number and you're trying to tell us, oh, it was this contract for, shelters, whatever. Like it's better to just have it printed off at the beginning. Also, there is the opportunity that it would have been purged from the system, depending on how late it is we're getting this. Sometimes, like, I'll try to go back into LGov to stuff from 2014, 2015, and it just says authorization not allowed. Like, you can't do it. It's not there anymore. There are also some procurements with special requirements. These are some of the commodities that require special handling and have specific rules for this particular commodity, and these include telecommunications, information technology, vehicles, elevator maintenance, equipment financing, printing, and labor and material projects over $10,000. Agencies can go to the OSP website for more information on these commodities. They can also reach out to our office, and we'll direct you to the buyer who handles them. They can walk you through the processes that are special to these. Just for example, a lot of these have to do with, like, pretty major cost expenditures that may take years to pay. So for example, information technology, like if we're buying you a big computer system, they're going to want to make sure, we have processes in place to make sure that that's not going to conflict with a plan that's already in place that's going to change down the road, and your stuff's going to be obsolete within a year. For example, with printing, that's a kind of efficiency issue. The printing needs to go through state printing because they have a certain quota they have to meet in order to hit their targets for cost effectiveness. So if we're going to be printing outside of that, then we need approval from them. So it's things like that.
All right, so we're gonna get closer to ending the presentation, and we're gonna talk about deficiency complaint forms. So what should I do if a vendor does not deliver as specified or has poor quality service? So if a vendor's not performing their contract properly, whether it's a one-time buy, purchase order, a blanket order that extends the entire fiscal year, a statewide contract, or just any sort of PO issued by OSP based on one of our contracts, you should take the following steps. So we always recommend for the agency to contact the vendor directly, see if you can resolve the issue internally, and document any correspondence or emails, telephone calls. Second, if that does not resolve the problem, agency should go on the OSP website and fill out a deficiency complaint form and submit it to our office. And this can be found on our website under Agency Resources, Purchasing Agency Forms. And agencies should keep in mind that just because you send in a deficiency complaint report on a vendor, that does not mean that that vendor cannot bid on a contract if we have to rebid it. However, there are instances where a deficiency can lead to a vendor getting suspended from doing business with the state. So for example, let's say you ordered a product that your agency must have by a specified deadline, and the awarded vendor is unable to deliver within that delivery time that they quoted on their bid. We can take these steps to cancel the PO and award it to another vendor who can make the delivery in the required time frame. If it costs the agency more than the original purchase order, we can surcharge the difference in cost. That deficient vendor will be suspended and will not be awarded any solicitations or ITBs from our office until that charge is paid in full to the agency. So that is always an option. Also, deficiency inquiries in the past have led us to finding things out that led to, say, immediate cancellations or suspensions. We've even had forged documents. A vendor can no longer, if a vendor no longer has a required license or certification, we've also found that out. So it's very important to remember that if the agency does not document a complaint and send it in, then we have no leg to stand on when it comes to either canceling a contract or stopping a vendor from bidding. An agency cannot send in a shopping cart and simply say, oh, we don't like this vendor because they didn't give us good service, so don't award to them again. We are required to consider any vendor's bid that's submitted unless we have legal justification for not doing so.
And I'd like to jump in real quick. One thing that we're seeing pretty consistently right now is shipping time problems. You can submit a deficiency complaint for this, and in fact, you should submit a deficiency complaint for this if it's been an issue. But at the same time, it seems to be market-wide. It's everything, it's everyone, and it seems to be at random. We'll just suddenly have a port shut down. We'll have sections of China shut down. So there have been delays, and so if it's a lot of times when we get the deficiency complaint, we will still go through the process of asking them to fix it and make it right and get it done. But for certain things like that are market-wide, that are like everyone and everybody everything is being affected by it, we're probably not going to go through the surcharging thing with people like that. And a lot of times if we were to rebid it, then they would be able to bid with a higher cost to get the shipping done more quickly, or they would be able to bid, so they'd be able to fix the problem through rebidding. So that's just something to keep in mind, is that a lot of these shipping issues. It's just gonna, unfortunately, we're gonna have to forecast better and request things further in advance and kind of know what we're looking for. Asking for something within a week that's coming from China is just, it's not gonna happen in most cases.
So that was a lot of information in a very short amount of time. So if y'all have any more questions, go ahead and type them in the chat.
We did have a couple come in. One is about vehicle orders. It says, I have to choose the vehicle tab. Should all orders have an LPAA approval number?
I believe so, yes. There's a pretty strict process for that. I believe they need LPAA number, and I'm not sure if that includes or if this is a separate piece, but there's also DOA approvals that have to go up to the commissioner. So Amy Gotro is our buyer for vehicles, and she is very responsive with these sort of things. Now, vehicles have been a kind of special case over the last year and a half, 2 years. There have been chip shortages. Most vehicles are smart vehicles now, so there are longer lead times, there are longer wait times, and there are smaller supplies. So I would get in touch with Amy to discuss anything you need regarding vehicles, but especially getting them in early. She can tell you the timeline for when you would need to have stuff in order to get it by the date you need it. If you need it next month, you're already way too late. I was talking to her the other day, and it sounded more like, in a lot of cases, we might be looking at 9 months to a year to get some certain vehicles. So definitely talk to her.
I did put her contact information in the chat as well for anybody that needs to contact her.
And your vehicle contracts on the ECAT will have her information on them as well.
Okay, we had one last question. Office Depot is so much more expensive than Staples. If we find a product that is cheaper, saving the state more money on Staples, can we purchase from Staples without violating purchasing rules?
So the two things with this would be, when we had a contract with Staples, I believe it was mandatory use. I think that might have been one of the only statewide contracts that was mandatory. So the first thing to check would be, is the Office Depot contract listed as mandatory? And it'll say that on the header of that contract. I don't unfortunately recall off the top of my head because I don't use it, but that would be the first thing to check. If not, then I guess you would be looking at your delegated authority, and if you could purchase it within your delegated authority. But if you ever have any specific questions about it, you can get in touch with the buyer on that Office Depot contract and talk to them about it.
Okay.
And make sure that you're doing everything in accordance with the rules.
Sorry.
We had one more question come in. If a vendor changes the prices before the completion of a contract, should we honor the new prices, or should the vendor honor the price quoted in the contract?
Depends on what, usually they should honor the prices that they submitted, especially if it's coming through our office. If we bid it out, we have terms consistently throughout all of our bids that say prices are to be firm, fixed, to include transportation, delivery, unless otherwise specified. So we basically tell them, like, when you submit something to us, it must be complete, it must be consistent, it must be held for the entire term of the contract. So if they're coming to you and telling you, oh, the price has increased, submit a deficiency complaint about that. Don't agree to anything on your end before talking to us, especially if it was something that we bid for you.
That's all the questions we had.
All right, so just remember that if you have any questions at a later time, you can always reach out to our help desk at this email address, OSP Help Desk Purchasing, and also our OSP website has a great deal of information that can be used to research various procurement topics. Or you can also reach out to Jeremy or I. Our information is stated here. And if there are no further questions, then thank you all for joining and have a great day.
Thank you.